Well, what is IDEA? IDEA is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. We're coming up on almost 20 years since it's been sort of reviewed and revised. The technical term legally is reauthorized. It's been around over 45 years. The main original version came out in 1975. Basically what it is legally is a funding statute, whereas 504 is an anti-discrimination statute. IDEA is a funding statute. It says, hey, if you follow these rules, then we'll give you money. If you don't follow the rules, then we're going to take your money away. And so think at the end of the day, you talk about in compliance with IDEA, what can the federal government do? If you don't comply with IDEA, they could take your federal funding away. You know what the rub there is, the catch? You still have to comply with it. And where are you going to get that money? Do you have 504 money? How much money do you get for 504, Dr. Harris? Zero. So where are you going to get all this money to do all this stuff for kids with disabilities? You're going to have to come out of general fund. The state of South Carolina several years ago was threatened to have all of their federal funding withheld because they weren't going to follow the rules. Now you say, oh, well, can we just opt out? No, you can't really opt out of doing this because otherwise you wouldn't be able to function. So let's talk about special ed, IDEA eligibility. A student with a disability under Bulletin 1508. All the bulletins in Louisiana, they're not just guidebooks, they're not just stuff that used to be on a shelf in a binder, they are state regulations. They're administrative law. So you've got, for you administrators, the big #1 bulletin for y'all, School Administrator's Handbook, Bulletin 741. Those aren't suggestions. They're legal obligations, every single one of them. So whether you're looking at 741 or 746, certification, 1508, 1706, 119, 1530, whatever, 135, whatever it is, those are legal obligations. And so everything in there is something that must be done. And it's stuff of which you need to be aware as an administrator. You have an obligation to comply with and be familiar with, not every law, I mean, there's no way to do that, I don't. But you have an obligation to have an understanding, a foundation, because you've got kids with disabilities in your schools. Now you have to depend upon others, including those individuals in ESS and in other departments to assist you, but you need to have, I don't know what 1508 is. Well, I don't know what 1530 is. Well, you need to know. If you don't know what Bulletin 119 is, you need to find out. You need to know what that is. Because lo and behold, there's going to be somebody out there who's going to say, under Bulletin 19, section so-and-so, you should be doing this, and you're not doing it. And it'd be embarrassing that you don't. So at least know who to call if you don't know. What is a core here of eligibility under IDEA is that you have to have two parts. Having one of the listed disabilities under IDEA, or in here under Bulletin 1508, which is the state regulations for implementation of the eligibility criteria, and then you also have to have, by reason of that disability, a need for special ed and related services. So sometimes you could have a kid that looks like they need special ed, but they don't have a disability. And the reverse could be, they could have a disability and not actually need special ed. Now there's going to be a small, probably a very small number of those, but it's a conjunctive, it's an and. You have to have both pieces in order to be eligible under IDEA. Well, what is special ed? I mean, you hear the term, but where is the definition? Well, if you look in the back of Bulletin 1706, in section 905, there are a whole bunch of definitions. So you're thinking, well, what's the definition of that, or need to refer to that? Look in section 905 of Bulletin 1706. All kinds of definitions back there that might be helpful, because you hear terms and you're like, well, yeah, I know what that is. But if somebody asks you, define it for me, and you're like, it's special stuff for a kid. Well, no, it's specialized instruction that is free to meet the unique needs of a student with a disability. We say, okay, fine. Well, what is specially designed instruction? Well, it's adapting as appropriate to the needs of an eligible student under these regulations, the content, methodology, and delivery of services. So the shorthand for special ed is basically adapting the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction to a kid who is eligible. Again, the unique needs, and then also what is important here, always coming back, and you're going to hear this in the second part of the presentation as it has to do with the IEP, is ensure access of that student with the disability to the general curriculum. Not some other curriculum. Some of you out there may have been around when there was the alternate curriculum, way back when. Well, there's one curriculum. So you're adapting the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction. That's what teachers go to school to be special ed teachers to learn to do. And then, so the student can meet the standards within the jurisdiction that apply. You have standards within your district. You have standards to which you must comply from the state. Well, difference in definition here. 504, what is the meaning there? Well, it's a qualified individual with a disability, child with a disability who falls into one of the following groups. Well, it's very, very broad, and there's a reference there to the federal regulations. And so basically, it's a kid in school who meets the definition, and it includes a kid who you are required to provide a free, appropriate public education under IDEA. So that's the definition there, but how you get there is going to be different, because the definition of a student with a disability under 504, hopefully you'll see there's a significant difference. They flip back here, determined to have one of the listed disabilities and be in need of special ed and related services. Well, if you look at this, really focusing in on a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities of such individual. Very different. Now, it doesn't say and needs specialized instruction. It doesn't say that. This is a singular. You can be eligible under 504 and actually need nothing. Sounds ridiculous, but it's quite possible to actually need nothing but still qualify, because the purpose of 504 is broader, of ADA is broader in that it is anti-discrimination. It is trying to include as many individuals who are eligible. Not everybody. It may seem like at a certain point that everybody's eligible, but you have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. Well, how many impairments do you need? What impairments? Well, only one is necessary. And it doesn't have to be learning. That is a critical difference between IDEA and 504, is that IDEA has to do with a focus on the adverse impact on a child's educational performance. Now, that being said, of course, that's not all academic, of course. However, can you have a child or an adolescent, let's say Lee, it used to be Lehigh, Liberty, called Lehigh for so long, Liberty High School, let's say there's a young woman coming in, she's a prospective valedictorian. She's talented in all three areas. She's gifted. She's captain of the cheerleading squad. She's captain of the volleyball team. She's president of the student council. She's got 12 scholarship offers to major universities. Can she be 504? Yes. Absolutely she can. Has nothing to do with academics. Major, major mistake that some schools and school districts make is to think that there has to be a hook of academics, that there has to be an academic impact. That young woman, and I'm just saying because we're here, maybe she's a severe diabetic. And so what accommodations does she need? Does she need extended time on tests? No. Does she need small group instruction? Does she need individualized testing? Does she need a note taker? Does she need a human reader? No, 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 no. What does she need? She needs to have a bottle of water in the room. Where no, you can't have drinks in the room. Well, an accommodation is she gets a drink in the room. No snacks in the room. She can have a snack. She needs to have a break to go to the nurse, to consult with the nurse. Or maybe she needs to take a nap. Maybe she needs an abbreviated day because she just gets completely exhausted. Those are all, so again, that's an example of 504 is bigger, broader, has nothing to do with academics. I hear every year, unfortunately still, oh, well, there's nothing wrong. They don't get a 504 plan because it doesn't affect their academics. It's like, no, you've got to look at that issue. Physical or mental impairment. So, because a kid breaks their arm or breaks their leg or gets a concussion, well, that's just temporary, so they can't be eligible for 504, right? Not necessarily. Because the change in the law that happened now, gosh, almost 15 years ago, is that if it's transitory and minor, then you don't qualify. So you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. Because are all fractures the same? Are all concussions the same? You go out there, see the boys out there with their helmets and everything getting ready for summer football practice, a concussion. Does sometimes the symptoms show up after days or weeks? They may still have effects. Memory and fatigue and other things. Yes? Absolutely. Very good example. It's something that I include in my presentations when I go deeper into this. Is long COVID is a term, a new term about what we have seen with kids and adults who are showing symptoms of COVID-related symptoms days, weeks, months after being negative or having had the disease, and then it's gone, and there's still lots of effects. So it's very correct that you don't just say, oh, well, they're done with COVID, so no more accommodation, no more plan. Is that if it appears again, and there's a whole host of possibilities. So you have to look at this from a case-by-case basis. So do not exclude kids. Well, it's just a broken arm, or COVID was last year, or they're done with that, or whatever it may be. You got to look at each individual child on their own merits. So again, to sort of recap and focus on the major differences is that under IDEA, you have to have a disability under one of those categories, which is under IDEA, really in Louisiana is 1508, and have a need for specialized instruction. Conversely, in contrast, 504 is a focus on eligibility for purposes of prohibiting discrimination in programs, services, and activities in public schools. So that's the main difference there. Is that on the basis of disability, you cannot exclude a child. It has nothing to do with whether they need services or they need accommodations. So, going a little bit deeper, if you don't need specialized instruction, then legally the student does not qualify. Under 504, eligibility is separate from the determination of need for any types of supplementary aids or services. So as I said before, it's possible for a kid to be eligible under 504 as a student with a disability, but then their plan is nothing. Like, how could that be possible? Well, maybe whatever interventions are going on, including medical or other types of supports, are such that they don't need anything in the school setting. but that's not the purpose of 504. So, do you have a child find mandate under 504? Yes, you do. You have a child find mandate under IDEA. You have one under 504. It's got to be active. You basically need to be saying, hey, if you may have a child with a disability, if you think you have a child with a disability, then contact us. Not we're sitting back and waiting for people to come see us. Child find has to be an active, ongoing process. Well, what about what would you do at SBLC? Well, you may not suspect a kid of having a disability under IDEA. Well, that's what they were referred for, so that's the question that we answered, and so we're done. It's like, no, you have that other child find obligation is to say, hey, do we suspect a disability under 504? Answer may be yes. Then you're going to look toward going to evaluation, or no. So if you have a student with a physical or mental impairment that limits a major life activity, should be referred for evaluation. Now, is it that every kid with an impairment qualifies for 504? No, because you have a substantial limitation. Anything can be a physical impairment, anything can be a mental impairment. Major life activities, almost nearly unlimited, but it's the substantial limitation, not just a little limitation. Mama said, oh, we got a B+ on his test, he needs 504. Okay. He got an A-, he needs a 504. He needs extended time because he got a B+. No. You can have a limitation. I would venture to say we all have some physical or mental limitation to some degree. As we get older, probably more. But does it substantially limit a major life activity? My eyes are not real good. I have a hearing loss in my right ear. But does it substantially limit major life activities? Have good contacts, don't need a hearing aid, at least not yet, so it's not substantially limiting a major life activity. We all could list other things that may be affecting us. They're not IDEA, not 504, not necessarily, because the eligibility criteria are different. What are similarities? Well, the similarities are that you are drawing from a variety of sources of information. The old 504 was, oh, doctor's prescription, ADHD, Ritalin twice a day, you get a 504 plan. No, you don't. That is legally insufficient as a basis for 504 eligibility. I don't care if it's a 50-page report from the dean of the Harvard Medical School. I don't care if the kid's got 6 different DSM-5 diagnoses. That's one piece of information. You have to have multiple sources. Procedures are very important by a group of individuals, not one person. So not only is a single source of information insignificant, deciding it on the basis of a doctor or a nurse practitioner or a medical psychologist saying that a kid has some kind of medical diagnosis and needs medicine, my response initially is, so what? That's something to look at SBLC. But who makes the decision? Dr. So-and-so out there at Children's or at Baton Rouge General? No, y'all do. Your team at your school makes the decision. You are the decision. A group of knowledgeable individuals makes that decision in conformity with the mandates, and you've got to look at academic, non-academic settings. It's not just in the classroom. It's not just in the library. It's all settings where there could be an effect. Cafeteria, bus, elementary, recess, all the various settings in which a student needs to be or has to be. And if you don't follow the procedures, sometimes, and more procedures from so-and-so, more procedures from ESS, more procedures from 504. Well, that's at least half the equation. Critically important to follow procedures. Otherwise, you can be looking at a denial of a free appropriate public education. Are there timelines under 504? Well, the law doesn't set any specific timelines. However, you default to the 1508, which is 60 business days. Now, you don't have to take that long, and I think it would probably be inappropriate to take that long in most situations, because what OCR, the Office for Civil Rights, within the Department of Education, who monitors and enforces this law, will look at the time it took you to gather and determine whether a disability is suspected, and how much time it took you to evaluate. If you've got the data after 10 days, well then you got to put that evaluation out. Because you think, well, I've got this 60 days. No, you don't have it. If you have enough information to make a decision, you make a decision, because if you don't, then the presumption is, well, then you're denying that kid the possibility of services for a whole big chunk of time. That would be a denial of FAPE in that situation. So it's not appropriate to sit on information if you have enough. Again, team decision, multi-source, documented. Cannot overemphasize the need for documentation. It's just perpetual. It's like death and taxes. You've got to document what you're doing. I know it's burdensome. I know that it's how many minutes you have in a day to do that, but it's very important to write it down. If we're defending y'all in a case, having pieces of paper and documentation is golden. A piece of paper is worth 1,000 words, 10,000 words, because it then comes down to mama said versus school said, and then you get into this big debate. And please, you got to maintain that stuff. I know it's end of the year and you're thinking, okay, time to flush all of this other stuff, time to go into the file cabinet and just purge. Be very, very cautious about what's tossed, especially anything that is signed by the parent, like student parent handbooks. Maintain those, because they're saying that I signed and received. Did you read it? My 3 kids went all the way through school, probably had, how many? Over 30 student parent handbooks over the years. I signed them all. Did I read them? Nope. But did I say that I received it and I understand what is in here? Basically binding yourself. That is important, because also what is really big is your student handbook, which I'm working with Mr. Shamlin and staff on the handbook, is that's actually approved by the board. It's a policy level handbook. So very important. So keep that kind of stuff. This kind of goes back to what I said about that doctor, or could be psychologist. Is a diagnosis necessary? The answer is no. I already said it's not sufficient, but it's not necessary, because who's determining whether the kid has a mental or physical impairment that substantially limits a major life activity? You are. You take that information. Another error that's made is we have to have a diagnosis. No, you don't have to have a diagnosis. Or we're going to wait until we get one, or we're not going to, even worse, we're not going to start the evaluation until we get a diagnosis, or until we get a psych report, or until we get a physician's report. That's a mistake. That's a mistake. And if you require, and I'm not saying that information isn't helpful, it certainly can be extremely helpful, especially when it's a true medical condition. If you say we've got to have it, then you're going to pay for it. Because part of part of, we say FAPE, what is the F in FAPE? Free. At no cost to the parent. So that is a rub there as well. If you're going to require it, then you're going to pay for it. Please be very cautious in both the special ed and 504 realm, is that do not hang your hat on grades or that the kid has progressed from grade level to grade level. It is one factor. It is one piece of information to consider among many other. Yes, sir.
You mentioned faith, and you mentioned the letter F, which is free. I want you to drill home and stress that an LEA, East Irish Parish, would probably never say we cannot educate a child, a special ed child. Can you tell us why?
Yes, I can. And that's a good question, because it actually is very, very relevant to the next presentation. Part two of the presentation is if you say, uncle, we can't do it. We're done. We can't educate the child. We cannot provide your child faith. Well, then what can the parent do? They're going to go find something. They don't even have to find FAPE. They just have to find services. They can go to any number, that isn't a whole lot for some kids, but what they'll do is then they'll send you the bill. And you talk about reimbursement for tuition or to pay. If you say we can't do it, then the parent's going to go get it, or a judge is going to order it, and you're looking at a minimum, typically. If you're talking about residential placement of a kid, significant issues behaviorally or autism and all of that, you're looking at $15,000 to $20,000 a month. And then that's over the course of time. So, and that doesn't come out of IDEA funds, ESS funds. It can't. It'd be illegal. From where is that money coming? General fund. And so over the course of time, if you say, well, we got this 12-year-old kid, we cannot educate it, we're going to write a check, you're looking at another 10 years, potentially. So you're looking at $200,000-$300,000 a year for 10 years. You do the math there. You're talking $2 to $3 million. That's tough. I've been in a couple situations where a school district with extremely significant issues with children made that decision. Excruciating decision to say we can't educate this kid. Should have, I mean, if we had the services, these kids would have been institutionalized. I don't say that lightly. I don't say that lightly at all. They needed that for them to function and to learn. School was not their least restrictive environment of any form. Yes?
The reason why I stress that is because I made a mistake in 2006. I threw my hands up and I was fed up with a ESS child post-Katrina. I had enough. School site level. About a month later, I received a letter from Charlotte Proceed and Jerry Arbor saying that this kid will remain on your campus until the end of the school year. Even though I had enough, the superintendent decided this child will remain at my campus at Park Forest. Now, I know that it's challenging. Sometimes you're ready to throw your hands up. This young lady ended up getting her own school bus. She had her own classroom. But the district would not say that we could not educate her. And we did. She went on to high school and graduated, and I've seen her recently. But I just wanted you to stress that because I know sometimes when we're meeting with our parents and kids, you want to throw your hands up and you said, I've had enough, they can't come because of that fate. The LEA will not back you. And I had to learn that the hard way.
And it, yeah. So that's usually a time where I'm getting involved, where they're asking me for input, and because they can see you make decisions, the trajectory ends up being litigation and the possibility of having to pay for tuition and private school and all kinds of therapies and all that. It can get extraordinarily expensive. So, and what's also a component of it, even if the district wouldn't say they're not going anywhere, if the parent files, we call it a due process hearing, what you get generally is called stay put. Stay put means the kid's not going anywhere legally. The judge says they're staying put. And you know how long that stays? Case go all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. Stay put applies. Unless the parent agrees to a change or a court orders a change. And that is very, very rare that would occur. So I'm not saying you're stuck with them necessarily. There are ways to try to work with that, but not to get out. Not say, I got to find a way to get this kid out of my school. That's not the way to approach that. And I'm not saying it's easy. I mean, again, I've been in special ed for about 30 years. I know. Healthcare plans. Another major mistake that is made by many school districts is thinking, oh, well, wait, my mom, you don't need a 504 eval. They have a health plan. You're working with the nurse. That's all they need. If you suspect a child has a health care plan, they've got a medical issue. So what would that say to you? That they have a physical impairment, safe assumption, that may significantly impair a major life activity. So you got a child find issue. So to deny a parent an evaluation by saying that they have a plan would be a violation of federal law, violation of their rights. So again, eligibility is separate from a determination of what the kid needs. At the end of the day, go through the evaluation process, yes, they have a physical impairment that substantially limits a major life activity, whatever that is. At the end of the day, what do they get? The health care plan. You're thinking, well, that was a big waste. No, you're thinking it's not a big waste of time. You're talking about anti-discrimination protection of eligibility under 504. If it were your child, I think you'd then say, okay, well, I'd say, well, this is ridiculous. At the end of the day, they get the same thing that they had to begin, but that's not the point. Okay? So be very clear about that. Is for your staff is to say, well, they already have a health care plan. We don't need to evaluate. Yes, you do. Seen decisions where a school district had to evaluate every single kid who had a health care plan that wasn't already 504. That'd be a lot. Accommodations and services are based upon a child's need, not parent preferences. Not administrator or teacher preferences either. Demonstrated need. This is not, when you get to the accommodation page of the IEP or the 504 plan, this is not Build-A-Bear. This is not, it's not going to Burger Smith and saying, I want pepper jack and caramelized onions and some of this Chipotle mayo. No. Eligibility under disability does not say, okay, well then great. And you know, the magic accommodation which solves every kid's problems is what? Extended time. Right? Wrong. Why is that automatic? Kid fails in regular time, so let's give him more time to be miserable and fail. No, I'm not saying some kids do need extended time. But in everything, always, every class, every assignment, that's a mistake. So let me give you an example. So if a kid, this applies whether it's 504 or SPED, Let's say a kid who's got problems in reading. Okay? Well, in math, you've got calculation, just kind of churning numbers, but then, you throw in some words and the kid crashes. Math quizzes and tests. Well, what if there's just computation? He doesn't need extended time for pure computation. So why are you giving it to him? You're inflating his score in computation. He needs the extended time when there is verbal, when there's something verbal associated with it, when there are words associated with it. Is it in every class? Because if you say extended time, we only needs it in math, well then Mom doesn't say only in math, so he gets it in reading too. He gets it in science. He gets it in this and this because you do not specify. Specify. Well, there's no blank there, Wayne. I don't care. Get out a sheet of paper. Write it on an addendum. Write it in the margin. Details are important. Who's supposed to do it? When? When are they supposed to do it? Kids sometimes have these conditions that come and go. Intermittent conditions, say something like migraines, shingles, gastrointestinal disorders, even form MS, multiple sclerosis, lupus, other kinds of things. When it's active, it's debilitating. When it's not there, they don't need it. They don't need it, they don't get it. So be very specific about that. Ensure that everybody's on the same page with implementation. Critically important. That everybody knows, not just, here's a copy of the 504 plan, or here's a copy of the IEP. Check off that you got it. But the follow-up question is, do you know not only what you're supposed to do, but how to do it? That's the question as a follow-up. You understand you're supposed to do this, but do you know how to do it? Because if they say, no, not really, or I'm unsure, it's your obligation, administrator, to then get the help and support from whomever it is. Whether that's a reading specialist, or whether that's the school psychologist, or whether that's whomever. That's your obligation, principal and district, to get that done. And make sure that you document implementation of accommodations. Doesn't matter how you do it, you just need to do it. I've had many cases where a failure to document accommodations was the basis of a finding by OCR against a school district. It's not a parent's or child's choice. It's not a child's choice, student's choice. I don't want the accommodation. Team said you need it. It should trigger the team coming back together to talk about it. To say, it says he needs it. Now, that said, is it once you give an accommodation, it's there for life? It becomes the 11th commandment? It's always going to be carved on a tablet or in a computer program somewhere? No. If a kid doesn't need something anymore based upon data, you take it away. Parents panic when you take something away from them, right? It's like, no, we should be celebrating that he doesn't need that anymore. No, he's got to have it. No, just give it to him one more year, please. The data is showing something different. Or he doesn't want it. Amazing how kids are fine with it. They get to middle school, junior high, and they don't want to go to a small group. They don't want to have individualized anything. What changed? Well, they changed. They were a child, and now they're different attitudes because maybe their peers are giving them a hard time or something about it, or maybe they're just uncomfortable, whatever it is. You've got to find a way, because if they need it, you've got to find a way to make it happen. Consistency of process and the decisions are by teams. Always an individualized determination. Yes, ma'am?
Back to what you said about, I can just think of a student and we switched over to taking assessments and things like that using computers but I've turned the volume down. Like, how do you, like, or, you know what I'm saying? Like, they choose sometimes to, like, not, on this one, I don't want to do it. And sometimes it's like, and I've had that happen. It's like, what do you do in those cases?
Well, that's where,
But they still want their accommodation. So, like, they're just, like, selective of when they
oh
do
yeah,
it.
but then you sit down with them. I mean, a kid at a certain point, you're talking about older kids, or maybe not so older, as you start talking about them as, there's a team of people who are trying to help you with this, and they've thought that this is what needs to happen. How can we make this work for you? And if the child is just resistant to it, it's like any behavioral. Take out your work. No, I'm not taking out my work. Sit in your seat. I'm not sitting in my seat. It's a behavior. It's a behavior that's interfering with the child's education. So the team needs to address it. I don't have a solution, because that's where the team comes together and tries to solve that issue. So I don't have necessarily an intervention, because what could work for this kid may be different from you absolutely have to document it. That's key here is, if a child is resisting or not complying, you absolutely document. And then the team comes back together to try to address it, because I say this over and over again, is what is the three-letter word which is the legal obligation under IDEA? Try. You need to try and try and try again, because if you stop trying, you start buying what the bill. You're having to pay the bill the parent's going to be sending you for the tutoring and the therapy and the education at the private something, or the residential dude ranch in Idaho. Literally, I mean, parents sending kids to residential placements in other states, and those are not inexpensive. And guess who still has an obligation for FAPE? Still comes back to it. It's y'all. As long as they are resident of East Baton Rouge Parish, then they're yours. They're yours. So that's the rub. Now you say, oh, we have to pay for all kids who go to non-public? No. If the parent voluntarily does that, no. But if you have an obligation for FAPE and the parent wants it, and then you say either we are unable or unwilling to do it, that's when it's going to trigger that responsibility. So yes, document, document, document. Try. Meet as a team. Does IDEA require you to succeed? No. Does it guarantee that every kid's going to graduate? No. Does it say you have to cure a child of their disability? No. Now, as parents who say, I want my child to be on grade level, does IDEA require you to bring a kid to grade level? No. But do you try? Yes. You try and have them advance individually. 504, same thing. Absences, out of sight, out of mind. We can forget about them. They don't come to school. Is that acceptable? Of course not. You got to find out why. You don't know whether it's a disability. You don't know what it is. Oh, they're virtual, so we don't have to worry about them because they're now electronic. They're an electronic child. They're not even a real child. They're an electronic child because they're not even physically here. Well, no. You've got to look at those kids too. That's another huge paradigm shift for all school systems in the country, is having these kids that are now, a lot of them, remote. And a big issue is that parents, well, I want remote. Well, you got to decide, can we still provide FAPE? Because the parents say, well, I want remote and I want to get FAPE too. And maybe they don't go together. Maybe FAPE can only occur in school, and you got to tell them, you're choosing virtual, but we're letting you know they can only get FAPE if they come to school in person. Yes.
Right now, as a district, we are in a voluntary corrective action plan with one student, and that's the virtual student. It's because we allow students with disabilities, and we said we provide a service, but we didn't have teachers. So Wayne had to help us craft that voluntary corrective action plan, which we're offering compensatory services starting today for those students who didn't get service the first 9 weeks, first 6 weeks of school.
Yeah. And we still have an IDEA due process hearing that requests and attempting months to resolve on a kid that didn't get services. So it is a big deal and can become a big deal, and it's stuffed cake. It's not like you could sit down in a meeting and resolve it. This is going on for months.
Like,
Yes, sir.
the word try. And I mentioned the virtual setting, but we also sometimes don't have teachers in the brick and mortar setting. So does the word try applies to that scenario?
Try applies in all scenarios. Yeah.
In other words, when you got those ESS vacancies, do your best to try to fill those vacancies.
It is, there's a reality. There's the plain reality that we don't have, and this is not just statewide, this is countrywide. Shortage of certified teachers, shortage of teachers, period, shortages in school psychologists, shortages in speech pathologists, you name a discipline, and there are shortages. Bus drivers. You think, well, when there would be a shortage? I see a sign, hiring bus drivers, just driving along the road. Yeah, you've got to keep trying. Now, that may be that you're not providing FAPE. That doesn't give you an out to say, well, we didn't have the staff, so sorry. It's like, no, the right to FAPE attaches to the kid. At the point in time that they are eligible, it's like they're cloaked in it. And that you can't, that you are either unable or unwilling. It's not that you're unwilling, you're just unable. Because you can't find, but that doesn't relieve your obligation. It's almost, you remember those times where you get into a taxi cab, you remember taxi cabs? The pre-Uber, pre-Lyft and all of that. And you'd get in and they'd hit a lever. And literally the meter was running. Or like parking used to be, the meter was running. And so when you are not providing FAPE, the meter is running on Comp Ed. Because compensatory education, really legally, it's now become way too common in the vernacular. It really has been historically when the district has done something wrong and is obligated to provide services because they have denied the child FAPE in some way. Well, the meter is running. You don't have the appropriate staff. You can't implement some part of the IEP. So that's why it may be that you're going to be doing stuff in the summer. Even have situations in cases where 22 may not be the end of the road. You think, oh, well, kids are gone. We have no obligation to kids past 22. Not if there is a court order or an agreement to provide services to 23, 24, 25 for a kid with a disability. It's not that it can happen, it happens. It is happening. I'm not saying necessarily here, but there are many cases where it does happen. Okay, let's move on to the next presentation. Second set of slides, if you have a second packet there, which is special education, FAPE, and other critical issues. Well, IDEA. We're going to dig into IDEA and some definitions. Well, what are the purposes of IDEA? And as you'll see down here at the bottom of the slide, the references to 34 CFR, section 300 point, whatever it is, those are the federal regulations, the IDEA regulations. Many times you will see a parallel citation with Bulletin 1706, and many times the numbering is very similar, but for here I just have the IDEA regs. To ensure FAPE, meet the unique needs. There's that unique needs term again. Here is the big picture. You're in elementary, but this is FAPE in the big picture. The 30,000 feet. This is the ultimate goal. To prepare for further education, employment, and independent living. Those are the ultimate goals. Those are the unwritten goals. You know, you have goals in the IEP. These are the unwritten goals. This is sort of capital I, big, bold IEP. This is the goal for every student with a disability. And I go back to independent living because sometimes you have parents who think that, again, the solution beyond it being extended time, guess what the other solution is to a child's education? Child-specific. And if one is good, how about two? Why not a whole staff? Why not have a whole team of people to wipe his nose and tie his shoes and make sure his backpack and that nothing ever goes wrong? Do we learn from not failing? Did we ever not write down an assignment off the board? Did we not ever forget to put a book in our book bag before we went home? Did we ever leave our shoe untied? Did we ever have our zipper unzipped? Did we ever? Of course, all of these things happen. Your obligation under IDEA is not to ensure that a child never fails. Yes?
They don't have a second page, but we'll give it to you. The second presentation, they don't have to.
Oh, okay. Okay. You ensure the rights of students with disabilities. And third one, I'm not saying it's unimportant, but what is really critical here is to assess and ensure the effectiveness of efforts to educate. This is the core foundation of progress monitoring. This is the core foundation of progress monitoring, and to ensure that what you're doing, this is part of your obligation from the superintendent, is delegated through all of the superintendents, various administrators, to the building level. You, within your school, is the point person to work toward assessing and ensuring the effectiveness. Of course you're working with ESS. Of course you're working with other components of the school system. But this is a core obligation of IDEA. So, what is FAPE? You say, well, what is FAPE? I say, well, it's free appropriate public education. No, I know that's just the words. 4 components of this. Provided at public expense under public supervision. You're the supervisor at your school. You're the boss. You have that obligation. I don't know why it says it has to be free twice. Maybe it's that commercial, that very annoying commercial that says it's free multiple times. But it's at public expense. No cost to the parent. Meet the standards of the state educational agency, that you're meeting all of the requirements of BESSE and the Louisiana Department of Education. You're following all of those bulletins, all of those rules, an appropriate education. And then number 4, which I think is really the crux, if there's any one of the 4 that is most important, provided in conformity with an IEP that meets IDEA requirements. 2 main components of that. In conformity with, which means that fidelity issue, that implementation, integrity, fidelity. You implement it as it is written. In conformity with what? An IEP. Is an IEP important? Yeah, it's a core of FAPE. It's one of the core components. If you call it about one of the 4 pillars. If you've got a four-leg chair, one of those legs just disappeared, what would happen? Workers' comp claim. No. A fall. So without the IEP, you also have violate. These are not distinct. I mean, interrelation here, in conformity with an IEP, not only just an IEP, any old IEP, that meets IDEA requirements, which means what? You followed the recipe. What are the recipe? Are all of those procedural requirements. So, what else besides the law, the written law, as far as the statute and regulations? Well, you have the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, there's been a lot of distraction recently about what should or shouldn't happen or its integrity. It's like, it doesn't matter what people think about the Supreme Court. It really doesn't matter. They don't really care. They are an independent branch of the government. And they're going to make decisions, and the decisions are binding upon the states, like it or not. And so we've had decisions, and this is now Rowley. You may have remembered this in the recesses of your brain from undergrad or graduate school in special ed, your course in special ed history or whatever. Rowley is now 40 years old. It is the foundational, the granddaddy, grandmama, the seminal special ed case. It established the standard for FAPE, procedural and substantive. So you have the 2 components of FAPE. Follow the process, and substantive, is it reasonably calculated? From where does this come? Did they just bring it out of thin air? No, it's based upon the 5th and 14th Amendments to the Constitution. Procedural and substantive due process. Then, 5 years ago, Andrew F., that's not a typo, it actually is E, Andrew, child, he went by Drew. Andrew F. reiterated that second part, reasonably calculated. And so this is the standard of reasonably calculated currently. An education that is reasonably calculated, and really it's IEP, an IEP that is reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in light of the child's circumstances, which is only a reiteration or recasting or rephrasing of unique needs. That child's circumstances. It's not, oh, well, your kid's SLD, well, we have an SLD program for them. Your kid's ED, well, they go into the ED program. Your kid's ADHD, well, we plop them into the ADHD bin. That is completely counter to this. Unique needs. Because is every kid with autism the same? Every kid with OHI, every kid who's ED, label. Those are labels. Labels are the golden ticket to get in. You know, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, golden ticket. 5 different kids, 5 different circumstances. They all got a golden ticket. They all got in the same door. Individual. They all had very individual needs. Did they not? Some might have had a mental or physical impairment that substantially limited a major life activity. Unique circumstances in light of the child's circumstances. Well, if you look at the second part, this is now 25 years ago. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which you have the Supreme Court and then you have the Circuit Courts of Appeal. We're in the Fifth Circuit out of New Orleans is the main. Fifth Circuit covers Mississippi, Texas, and Louisiana. What the Fifth Circuit says is binding upon us legally. So 25 years ago in a case out of Texas, you may know Cypress Fairbanks is a school district in the Houston area. Well, a case out of that is Cypress Fairbanks v. Michael F. or say Cypress Fairbanks Independent School District v. Michael F. And they came up and broke down that second part, that second prong, that substantive prong, and say, is the IEP individualized? Is it devised and provided in the least restrictive environment? Is there coordination and collaboration of key stakeholders? And is there demonstrated academic and non-academic progress? So a big question was, after Andrew F. came out, did that change the FAPE standard nationally? I know y'all were all nervous about it. No. But people like me, we were, because it would have been gargantuan that if the Supreme Court had raised or lowered the FAPE standard, they wouldn't have lowered it. If they had raised the FAPE standard, that would have been a monumental decision. It didn't. The case came out of the 10th Circuit. It actually came out of Colorado. And the way that they had interpreted FAPE, they had interpreted it too low. And so the Supreme Court said, 10th Circuit, you got it wrong. So the question was, 5th Circuit, do we have it wrong? And the 5th Circuit said, no, we don't. In a case that came out, Spring Branch, another Texas district, no, Andrew F. represents no major departure from Rowley. And then what I liked is the 9th Circuit, which is way out west in California. I think Newport Mesa is in California, and there are also some other states like Nevada, Oregon, Washington. But anyway, 9th Circuit said it, and I put it in here. Andrew did not change, but simply clarified Rowley. That's basically it. Oh, well, you're denying my kid FAPE because the Supreme Court just changed the definition and they raised the bar. Not here. They did in the 10th Circuit, but we don't live in the 10th Circuit. We live in the 5th Circuit. Of course, you don't say it as sarcastically as that, but that basically, I think that pretty much has died down. I don't think that anybody, at least that I've heard in Louisiana, and any advocates are trying to push that issue because it would be a dead issue, because they'd just be wrong. So what does the individualization mean? Is that you're focusing on that student's performance, that student's current performance, that it requires active and ongoing monitoring. That is, that progress monitoring, and that you are analyzing data, that you're not just collecting it, because collecting data is the least important part of it. What you do with it is what is really much more important, to then develop and revise, because the IEP talk about being a living document, something that is subject to change as needed. The second component is LRE. LRE, least restrictive environment. Citation here is to Bulletin 1566. Who gets the door prize for knowing what bulletin that is? Still asleep, or you don't know, or both. Pupil progression bulletin. Principles, you gotta know that one. Gotta, G-O-T-T-A. Doesn't exist in the dictionary. You really, really need to know that around this time of year, because you got parents who are saying, I wasn't given notice that my child was going to fail. Would that be a violation of pupil progression? It'd be a violation of state law, because you have an obligation under state law to tell a parent that a kid might be failing, and to talk about it, and to have a conference, and da-da-da, and you have an SPLC about promotion and all of that. There's a lot of important stuff in pupil progression, so I'm not giving you your summer reading list here, but there's stuff which you need to be familiar. So LRE, and this is the best definition of LRE that I've seen, happens to be in 1566. Placement decisions for exceptional students must be made in accordance with the LRE requirements of state and federal laws. Well, you have to do it anyway, but it's stated in this way. That's the most succinct statement that I've seen in the regulations. LRE means you are participating. A child with a disability is participating with students without disabilities to the maximum extent appropriate. Somebody may try to pull a fast one on you and say, LRE means my child has to participate to the maximum extent possible. That's not the standard. The maximum extent possible is they're just in the regular, they're with kids all day, every day, and they think that that is LRE. That is not LRE. It's where the child is participating to the maximum extent appropriate, because appropriate means a child is in an environment where they can make meaningful educational progress. LRE does not mean the regular classroom all day, every day. LRE could be in a residential school. LRE could be in a hospital. LRE could be in self-contained. LRE could be in the regular classroom. There are schools or school districts who are still making the very illegal categorical decision. We're a full inclusion school. We're a full inclusion parish. We're violating federal law on a daily basis, parish. Hopefully they're not doing that anymore wherever. It's like, you must, by federal law, offer a continuum of alternative placements. Because LRE is where the child will make meaningful educational progress, academically and non-academically, and you don't know what that is. The IEP team, and then can it change over time? Of course it can. Doesn't mean, oh, self-contained, and self-contained does not mean 100% in the back 40 all day. The kid can be in regular classes and other stuff for a percentage of the day. It's talking about, and then resource. It's all about the minutes. Third part of it is coordination and collaboration. Very important. Regular ed teacher, everybody understands and is capable of executing. That is, not only do you know, as I said before, not only do you know what you're supposed to do, is you know how to do it. Administrative supervision. Any administrators in here? Of course there are. You have an obligation to make this happen. Full knowledge of IEP, not just, okay, here's your page, here's your page, here's your page, here's your page. You're getting a whole copy, you're getting a whole copy, you're getting a whole copy. Read it. If you got questions, then we'll discuss. Staff training, joint planning and assessment, and communicate. It doesn't mean that you have to have 15 people in a room with coffee and cookies, or cake, or king cake, or whatever it is. It can be the communication, it can be emails, it can be notes, it can be conversations. But again, what are you supposed to do? That D word? Document. Document that you communicated, that you collaborated. Then the fourth component is positive academic and non-academic gains demonstrated. Educational benefit includes non-academic, which is social, self-help, motor, to a degree communication. All of those non-academic, not purely necessarily, but those non-academic areas are important too. Implementation with fidelity. You implement it as it's written. Doesn't matter, teacher, I don't agree with this. Okay, that's your opinion. Teacher has an obligation to implement it. Does he or she have the discretion not to do it? Not legally. They don't, it'd be monitoring, it'd be written up. Tell them to do it, they don't do it, well then that's insubordination. Then you're looking at personnel action. I don't care how wonderful they are, I don't care who they're related to. They're violating state and federal law, they're out of here. I know it's not that simple, but that's the way it should be. That's what you should be doing. Because they're going to get you and the district into a lot of trouble for not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Plus, it's violating the kid's fate. And if they say, I don't agree with this, well, then bring it to the team. I'm not going to do this extended time because he doesn't need it. Well, you have the data to show that he doesn't need it. Well, then let's come back to the team and you explain to the team that he doesn't need it. And then guess what? We take it off the IEP. Mama has a stroke with that. Well, she has recourse if she disagrees with it, but you're making database decisions. So if you can disagree is fine, but you do not legally have a choice not to follow what's on the plan. Gains in all areas are not required, but what you have to do is implement it with fidelity. Again, you are trying. That at the end of the day, at the end of the 9 weeks, or at the end of the year, that there is not the success that you had hoped under the objectives and the goals. That's regrettable, but there's some progress. Parents have failed universally when they say you did not make expected progress. Well, not that we expected. If we weren't making expected progress, we tried, and we met again, and we changed things, and we worked, and we worked, and we worked. That he didn't make a year's progress in a year, that's not a denial of faith. That's a disappointment on the parent's part, not diminishing that. That may be a disappointment to you as a school leader, maybe disappointing to your staff who have worked very hard with this family and this child. But legally, you have met your obligations. And document. The standard for review of an IEP for those last two factors, which is coordination, collaboration, and academic and non-academic benefit, this comes from the Fifth Circuit, so we need to listen to what they say from a case from a couple years ago. Again, another case out of Texas. Big state, lots of cases. The IEP appropriateness inquiry in this circuit considers staff implementation and student performance over a period of time. So the individualization of the IEP is largely a snapshot in time. At the point in time, or the LRE determination is largely a point in time when it's developed, but coordination and collaboration and academic benefits and non-academic benefits, that's proof in the pudding. That's where the rubber hits the road. You're having to demonstrate that over time. Now let's talk about Andrew F. and IEPs. Andrew F., again, is a Supreme Court decision. Did it have stuff to say about IEP? It had a lot to say about IEPs. This is some very helpful language, I believe. This is one of the major paragraphs from that decision. And I encourage you to read it. Again, your summer reading. The child's educational program must be appropriately ambitious. Let's stop there. I bolded it and highlighted it. Why? Because appropriately ambitious, not just ambitious. Because a misreading, a parent may say, this IEP has to be ambitious. Or the advocate, it has to be ambitious. That's what the Supreme Court said. And if it's not ambitious, you're violating the law. It's like, no, ma'am. It has to be appropriately ambitious. To be ambitious would say, this kid's going to be Heisman Trophy winner and be the #1 pick in the NFL draft, and then after he plays for 5 years is going to be the dean of the Harvard Medical School. That's ambitious. But for this kid, in his unique needs, that's not appropriately ambitious. So let's talk about what's appropriately ambitious based upon the assessments and based upon your input and based upon the input of these professionals that we have around the table. In light of his circumstances, doesn't say in light of the child's disability. It doesn't say in light of the child's label. Label is only that golden ticket to get into special ed land. It is not determinative of what the kid gets or what the child doesn't get. just as advancement from grade to grade is appropriately ambitious for most children in the regular classroom, they're talking about Amy Rowley. Amy Rowley from Rowley, the decision in 1982. Amy Rowley was a girl with hearing impairment. She was in a regular class. So advancement from grade to grade and doing all that, that was an appropriately ambitious for Amy. But Drew had different needs. Andrew had different needs. He had autism. He still has autism. Lots of challenges. His needs were different. Because his needs were different, the IEP is different. The goals may differ, but every child should have the chance to meet challenging objectives, not just objectives. They should be challenging. Your role is not structured babysitting. Parent could be thrilled, oh, y'all are wonderful, delightful, you take care of my child, da-da-da-da, we're so thrilled with what you do and love them and they love you and la-da-da, kumbaya and all that. Where are the objectives? Are you challenging that young woman who's got severe cognitive and physical challenges? Yes, you love her. Yes, she loves you. Yes, the parents are thrilled. So what's wrong? The objectives stink. They've been the same objectives over and over and over again. How are you bringing that child forward? So it's all right if the parent doesn't complain. No, it's not all right. So you got to think about, yes, it's wonderful that everything is nice, but at a certain point in time, a parent may say, oh my goodness, my child is now 16. What is she going to be able to do out there when she's no longer in the womb of the wonderful people in the school system who have been loving and taking care of her for the last 18 years? Then it's 22 and then they're walking away, and what have you taught her? What skills does she have? So that's by the challenging objectives, not just for kids with significant disabilities, but all of them. The importance of the IEP is it's not just a form, not just boxes to be checked and lines to be filled. It is constructed only after careful consideration of the child's needs, only after consideration of. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Stewart, quick time check. I know MDR is a big piece that we need to make sure we cover. I think right now we're approaching 9:10, and we've got about 20 minutes left.
30.
30 minutes.
I'm going to do 30. I'm going to override your cutoff. No, I'll cut through this in 3 minutes, and then I'll get to MDR.
Okay.
Okay. No, 9:45 is okay. Okay, good. You must consider multiple sources in development of the IEP. Parent input and the evaluation itself. Present levels need to be based upon present information. If you're saying, oh, the kid got a 4.1 on the RAT 5 in 2020, that's not present levels of anything. What are they doing within the curriculum now? What are they doing? Not what they did in the re-eval that's 2, 3, or 4 years ago. What are they doing recently? Again, present levels of performance. Doesn't have to be on some big standardized test. It can be on the curriculum, whatever you're doing. Are you not giving stuff out there, whatever you're doing, assessments out there? Yes, you're doing that. Include that. It doesn't have to be what pupil appraisal gave or some big state assessment. An IEP, I know, it's a whole day's in service, but goals, let's just real briefly, when you're developing goals, so important, is that you're identifying the knowledge, skills, or behavior that a student is expected to demonstrate. Goals is say the child will increase a grade level in an IEP year. That is baloney. That is an F. That is go back and you're not even close. What does the kid need to do or show you? If you can't observe it, then it's inappropriate. It's a failure. If you can't observe an objective, if you can't observe a goal, then you can't measure it. So, going to toss it back. So please make sure that you have specificity and detail. Goals must be measurable and make sense. Last slide before we move on to MDRs. Students shall successfully cross the street with 100% accuracy 4 out of 5 trials. What happened at the 5th trial? Are we calling waste management? Are we calling EMS? They could still reach the goal, and they still end up in the hospital. I was actually on an IEP in Jefferson Parish when we monitored one time. I mean, you know what the teacher's trying to say, but a colleague of mine saw that and got a chuckle when she brought it to the teacher's attention, but it really is, it's got to make sense. And you kind of reflect and think about it, and you kind of get a laugh out of it. But so I leave that for another day for IEPs, and so we're going to move on to MDRs. And so we've got a full half hour to do a 2-hour presentation. Yes, sir. Okay. Okay, good. Okay, let's do 30-minute. Remember the Reader's Digest condensed version. This is the Reader's Digest condensed discipline and MDR issues. So what are we talking about? Kids with disabilities. First and foremost, here we go. Back to 504. Really, non-discrimination issues. Students with disabilities retain the same rights as kids without disabilities. This is IDEA in Section 504. So whatever you give a kid, regular kid, same kid. So example would be if you provide services to kids who don't have disabilities during a disciplinary situation, then you have to provide it to kids with disabilities. You say, oh no, well we know that you don't have to provide. It's like, no, if you're giving it to kids, regular kids, kids without disabilities, then you have to give it to kids with disabilities. That's part of the non-discrimination provision. You don't have an opt-out of not giving to kids with disabilities stuff that you're not giving to kids without. In that context, they have to have at least as much. That's that non-discrimination coming in, that 504-based, ADA-based. So, again, here, entitlement to an expulsion hearing. Expulsion hearing does not go away. It is a procedural due process right, unless a parent waives it. So say, no, there's no expulsion hearing for when it's a manifestation. Well, no, if they want it, they get it. They're entitled to it by law. So, failure to provide procedural due process can be a denial of FAPE. Discipline is a targeted monitoring area for a federal consent judgment affecting a school district. I've been working on that federal consent judgment with another school district for 6 years now. Still going on. And it's not going away until the judge says it goes away. And then districts can have and can be placed under state-level corrective action plans for discipline-related issues. Talk about ongoing issues with disproportionate representation of students with disabilities, minorities, other categories who are represented within discipline. Still a big issue, not just in the state, but nationally. So, corporal punishment, just as a reminder, for kids with disabilities is prohibited by state law, so it has to be prohibited by school board policies. That is a kid with an exceptionality other than gifted or talented only, and includes kids eligible under 504 who have a 504 plan. Removal generally is whenever you remove a kid from where they are supposed to be instructionally, whether that's on the bus. Okay, that's not instruction, but that's an educational environment. Recess, library, classroom, hallway, field trip, that's all a potential removal based upon behavior. Just real briefly, you have to document. Say, oh, well, we're going to give you an early summer vacation. We're going to give you a 3-day weekend when everybody else has 2. Early Christmas, early Easter, early Mardi Gras. No, those are removals based upon discipline, and they need to be documented as such. Assuming the kids without disabilities don't get any services during this time, you can then suspend a kid up to 10 school days in a school year. Guess what? Good news. All kids you have with disabilities, you've got 10 more days. Starting in August, the clock resets. You don't get to carry over any from this year that you didn't use. Sorry. There are no rollovers. But you got 10 for all these kids without consent, without providing services, regardless of whether the behavior is a manifestation or not. Many parents will say, you can't suspend my kid, it's a manifestation. It's like, yeah, we can up to 10 days. Now, whether you should is another question. You do not conduct an MDR. Please don't do that because you don't have to, unless you're considering a disciplinary change of placement, and we're going to get to that. Once you get past that magic 10 days, it's a different world. You must provide FAPE. And you must provide, again, there's that educational services to make progress in the general curriculum and advance toward IEP goals, and you have to consider LRE. You're thinking, that comes out of the school administrator's bulletin, Bulletin 1313. After 10 days, they have to address goals and objectives, needs, access to general curriculum, and LRE. That's the big deal is, oh, well, we can do that wherever we want? No, not legally. You can decide the kid could be educated on the moon, but does that comply with LRE? Probably not legally. Oh, well, we just send them virtual. But is that legal? There's a difference between, oh, that's what we do, and if what you do is legal. Or we send them, we automatically put them here, or we automatically do that. It's like, well, for a particular kid, have you considered LRE? So again, coming back to the question, can you suspend? Should you suspend? Under the new state laws that came out last year and are being updated this legislative session, I have no doubt it's going to continue. The should you suspend thought principals, assistant principals, who's ever responsible for disciplinary decision making, you really need to spend more time on that second question. Because the state law is requiring you to think about other options other than suspension, and certainly other than expulsion. Intervention. This is absolutely critical for kids with disabilities. If there is behavior that interferes with his education or her, or the education of others, the IEP team must consider strategies to address the behavior. Positive behavioral strategies, not punitive, positive behavioral strategies. That's an imperative under federal regulations. Position of the Department of Ed is he is supposed to have appropriate behavioral interventions, positive behavioral interventions. That doesn't mean you can't have anything negative, but it needs to be positive. So, to the MDR, if the kid is out for more than 10 school days in a school year, or you're projecting, you're saying we're putting him over the magic threshold, you must do a manifestation determination because you are recommending a disciplinary change in placement. It's not a done deal. Legally, it's not a done deal. Now you say, oh, well, the kid's already been out 18 days. Well, then it's happened. That doesn't relieve you of the obligation to do the MDR because there's been a disciplinary change in placement. So don't say, oh, well, we'll wait until it's after. It's like, no, you're only trying to mop up a problem if it's past 10. Do not wait. You're proposing a disciplinary change of placement because these are among the top 2 or 3 situations in which I get involved when there's counsel for the other side, is when a kid with a disability is been moved somewhere because of behavior, because of discipline, and the procedures have not been followed. So what do you have to do? You got to be giving them written notice. Notice is not notice under IDEA unless it's in writing. Verbal is noise. It's not notice. It must be in writing. It must be through the forms that are used and recommended by ESS. You have to have an IEP team meeting within 10 days of the proposal. And if there's going to be a significant change in placement, which moving a kid to a more restrictive environment is automatically a significant change of placement under Bulletin 1508, you have to do sometimes called a mini reeval. It's a short reeval. It might be a 60-minute reeval as opposed to a 60-day. You have to do an MDR. Because Bulletin 1508 says for change of placement is moving a student to a more restrictive environment where the student will be in regular class less than 40% of the school day. And what are examples of that? If you're proposing them to go to self-contained, if they go to an alternative school, which is the alternative place. Oh, we're going to send them an alternative placement. Well, that's an alternative school. That disciplinary option that you have, well, if they're not on a regular campus, that's a disciplinary change of placement. Or projected to, if they go from a regular campus literally to anywhere. Or if they're going to go to homebound, and always, anytime, expulsion is a disciplinary change of placement, which is going to trigger an MDR. Expulsion hearings and MDRs are separate meetings. They're not the same meeting. They shouldn't have the identical people there. Separate written notice is required. Separate written notice is required. They are 2 distinct, separate processes. Please do not conjoin the 2 notices into one. The hearing officer, child welfare attendants, supervisor, whomever that is, heading up the disciplinary hearing, has no business being at the MDR. There's no purpose for them to be at a manifestation determination review. They've done their work at the expulsion hearing. Technically, the expulsion hearing just determines whether the student committed the violation, which is the subject of the MDR. Did they do it or did they not? Collecting evidence and making a determination as to whether they did it or not. If they did it, then what consequences? Do they affirm your recommendation, or do they modify it, or do they toss it aside? Conversely, the MDR team determines whether the behavior was a manifestation of the student's disability. Separate issue, separate purpose entirely. Completely different. The expulsion hearing has nothing to do with the MDR. The information that is gathered or gleaned through the expulsion hearing can be utilized in the MDR, but it doesn't determine anything. The MDR team makes that decision. Yes?
For clarity, this is why we do the expulsion hearing first, because at that expulsion hearing, we want to determine whether or not the child committed the offense.
Right.
If we determine that the child did commit the offense, we move to the MDR to determine if that child committing the offense was a manifestation of the disability.
Yes. Yes. It is preferred that the expulsion hearing come first. And that is a better way.
And that was a recent change in the past year prior to reviewing the MDR.
And why was that change made? Because of me. Because attorneys that do what I do, we are of the opinion that the expulsion hearing should take place first. And we don't need to go into the reasons of that because we don't have enough time to do that, but maybe another day. Please note the significant change that occurred in 2020. Can't believe it's already been 2 years. The parent may appeal an expulsion recommendation to the school board even if it's reduced to a suspension. That was a change made in 2020. So whether it's, certainly if it's affirmed as to an expulsion, it can be appealed, but if it's reduced to a suspension, they can still appeal it to the school board. Yes?
While the student is waiting for the expulsion hearing, they're generally suspended or they're in in-school suspension. So they're not necessarily getting their services. So
Hold on one second. Good question. It was, well, pending the expulsion hearing, they may be on out-of-school suspension or an in-school suspension. Well, you make a decision to put them on out-of-school suspension, the meter's running on your 10 days. So you go 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. In-school suspension, another in-service in of itself. Just because a kid is in school doesn't mean they're receiving FAPE. You can call it in-school suspension, but what are they getting? If they're sitting there and it's a substitute paraeducator or parent sitting there and they're sitting writing lines saying all work and no play makes Wayne a dull boy, any of you Stephen King fans out there, that's not FAPE. So whether they're in school or out of school, it's a non-FAPE day and legally would be counted as such. So you now have to have the expulsion hearing as of last year on a shorter time frame. There's an absolute time frame that you're legally required to do it. And then this district is doing it even faster than that, which I think is a good idea. But yeah, so to say, oh, well, pending that, the FAPE rules still apply. Yes, ma'am. Right. That was. The issue there is that you need to be very quick with your paperwork. That's why also this district is requiring the expulsion hearings to be held more quickly than is required under state law, which is a good thing. So how do you stay in compliance is that what the state law is basically pushing districts to do is to do away with out-of-school suspension, except in extreme circumstances. To basically do away with expulsion except in extreme circumstances. The impetus is to keep the kids in school, in instruction. And so the challenge is for you is to have the child, as opposed to out of school, is to have them in school. And it could be an in-school suspension where you're then putting in and pushing in, so to speak, FAPE, pending the outcome. Now, there's sometimes where it's like, no, this behavior, this kid needs to be out, off of campus, and understandably, but that's why things need to happen very quickly, because you could burn up your non-FAPE days very quickly. So I don't have a solution on how do you comply. That's going to be an internal push to say, how are we going to make that happen and happen quickly?
So Joe, I think what we probably have to do is, here to call in, if you got only 3 non-FAPE days left, you have to expedite that hearing.
But doesn't in-school suspension change their LRE also? Because they are in the building, but they're not in their LRE.
That would definitely be an issue, is if they're in the building but they're not if they're not receiving FAPE. Now, you could do in-school suspension, and if they're getting FAPE, it could be arguable that, well, they're not in the regular classroom, but they're subject to suspension. This was in lieu of an out-of-school suspension. So you're doing your best efforts to keep them in school, but then they're in a separate setting for that limited period of time, hopefully a very short period of time. I'm not going to say that that's going to insulate you from a challenge to say, no, you changed his placement because he's supposed to be getting this and this and this, and ISS is not covering that. We can't get into too much of a back and forth here because I've got to get in. But it's an incredibly important question. And we can try to pursue that later and have a conversation, because what is important is that things happen quickly. And as you know, things don't usually happen as quickly as they need to happen. What is really important, and if you can hold questions, because I've got like 10 minutes left and I've got a bunch of slides, I hate to cut you off, you're more than welcome to come up after, is the impetus is to keep the kids in school. And that just behavior out of school suspension is really something that should be a thing in the past. It doesn't eliminate that, but to say that the kid is gone without intervention, without being at a serious level, is something that really is a big push legislatively, and it's a big push nationally. And so if you're of a mentality that a kid has an infraction that they're out of school, that's not going to work very well for you in the long run. Okay, when is it required to do an MDR? And I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, so I promise to get you out of here by 9:45. When you propose a disciplinary change of placement, do not do an MDR any other time. Parent requests it. No. I want you to do an MDR before you suspend my child. I want it put in the IEP. They're like, do not put it in the IEP, that you will do an MDR anytime you want to suspend the kid. Because you don't have to. Because they want to debate it. They wanted to try to prevent it. Don't do that. Only when a disciplinary change of placement is proposed. Critical components of this is that a team decision. Relevant members of the IEP team. It's basically a special form of IEP team. And that you shall consider all relevant information, which is the education record, parentally provided information, staff observations, the student's actual behavior. What does that mean? Not kids with disabilities. Kids with ED do this, or kids under the DSM-5, kids with conduct disorder. No. I don't want to hear categorical stuff. I want to hear, what did this kid do? That they have a label or not a label is really only a little piece of information. I don't care what kids with ADHD do. What did this kid do? Because parents will try to say, oh, because he's got ADHD, because he was selling drugs, that's a manifestation of his disability. It's like, I don't think so. A lot of court cases say, that's not impulsive. He had to get the drugs, he had to put them in his backpack, he had packaged them in weighed them and packaged them, and he had to put prices on them, and he went in a location and he sold them to certain people. That's not impulsive. That's entrepreneurial. Which is not an ADHD criterion, by the way. Main two questions, the only questions that are really asked and answered. This is it. Was the behavior caused by or have a direct and substantial relationship to the student's disability? And you must answer this question. Take time and look at it. And number two, was the behavior the result of failure, direct failure to implement the IEP? Very important question. This is applicable to Section 504 kids as well. So, if the answer is yes, it had a direct and substantial relationship caused by, or the failure to implement the IEP was the direct cause of the behavior, then you must conduct an FBA, you must develop or modify the BIP. The kid goes back to their original placement. Unless the parent agrees through the BIP to go to that alternative placement. Parent would have to agree if it's a manifestation. No ifs, ands, or buts there. Legally, you cannot move a kid to a more restrictive environment if it's a manifestation. Extremely limited legal exceptions, which we can't get into now. Don't ask about them now because they're extraordinarily unlikely to be able to occur, but this is the rule. And what's very important here, principles along with ESS, if you have determined that the reason why it's a manifestation is a failure to implement the IEP was the direct cause, the LEA shall take immediate steps to address that issue. So if you've determined the reason why it's a manifestation is a failure to implement the IEP, you must address that immediately. For example, do you have substitutes in EBR? Sometimes. Do substitutes know which kids have disabilities and what they need to do to implement the plan? I see a shake of the head. That's a problem. Subfolder should have a cheat sheet. She gets extended time, she gets to go to speech, she has OT. Watch out for her, she's got a behavior plan. I mean, all of this stuff, that's what they need to know. They have to know that. Otherwise, you're going to lose on this. Failure to implement because the substitute didn't even know the kid had a disability, let alone their 504 plan or their IEP. They have to know this information to do their job. Critical issue. So, if you don't follow what you're supposed to do for MDRs and after, here's an example you can look at. Flint's got more problems with just their lead in their water. They've got problems with FAPE, follow through. Failure to document, violation, failure to provide FAPE after 10th day. I mean, if you're not documenting and having an MDR, you're easily going past the 10-day. That's an easy call by the Department of Education in Michigan to see that there's a denial of FAPE. Just a couple minutes left. Back to Andrew. If there's an interference, as I said, there's an obligation under IDEA that if a student's behavior interferes with his education or the education of others, you must reconvene the IEP team or 504 team. It's a 504 kid. When it went back to the district court, that is Douglas County, back in District of Colorado there, they said you denied FAPE. Supreme Court changed the standard for us, you denied FAPE. What were the major facts that worked against the school district? Failed to show evidence of FBAs and failed to show evidence of BIPs to address the behaviors that were interfering. Now, I'm not saying every instance is going to end up going to the Supreme Court, because they don't. By the end of the day, what's the damage here, at least monetary? And this is only to the parent, $1.3 million. That's district to parent to settle. That doesn't talk about how much they had to pay their own counsel. That doesn't count how many people quit, how many people won't want to work for Douglas County. Doesn't count how many daiquiris were drunk. Doesn't matter how many visits to the smoke shop were happening, legal in Colorado, whatever. Just saying, there's damages associated with this that go well beyond $1.3 million. I'm saying, if they'd done FBAs and BIPs, would they not have gone to the Supreme Court? But that's what happened in Michael F. Remember that Cybers Fairbanks v. Michael F. case? What did they do? They met and they met and they met again. Michael F. was a terror. He ripped a chunk of a girl's hair off on a bus. He attacked people. He hurt people. But they met and they met and they met again. They did FBAs, they did BIPs. Were the parents happy? No. Was the kid making some progress? Yes. Was he doing well? No. But the court said, this is what IDEA requires, is that you try. Yeah, he's a kid with needs. He's a kid with disability. He's got behavioral needs, and they are working on it. Is it to your satisfaction, parent? Parent satisfaction is not a criterion under IDEA. Of course, we know that there are some parents that if that were the criterion, you'd never be able to satisfy them. You have to try and try and try again and keep working. That's why Cypress Fairbanks was able to prevail in that case. That was probably why Douglas County did not win in this case and then is suffering the consequences of that. I am out of time.
This was just an appetizer around NBR. Dr. Harris will nail down the date before school starts, and we'll have a virtual meeting. We can set something up.
I'll be happy.